This podcast contains adult language and stories of true crime. If you don't like laughing, crying, or being horrified at the actions of other humans, this podcast is not for you.
Welcome, listeners, to Season 4, Episode 11 of Resolved Mysteries.
Hi.
Hello.
We're so happy you're here. We're so happy to be back. If you don't know our voices, I'm Eliza.
I'm Alison.
I'm Karlin.
And welcome. If you're new here, you should really go back and listen to all of our other episodes. But we're happy that you're here, and we are a show where we rewatch, recap, and give you the latest updates to cases featured on the best show of all time, Unsolved Mysteries. And as most of you know, for every review we receive, we donate $1 to a different organizations. And this month's is the Coalition of Immacaulay Workers, CIW-online.org. And they started here in Southwest Florida. This is from our patron, Matthew. And do great work fighting human trafficking and gender-based workplace violence. So, Matthew, thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah,
Thanks,
great
Matthew.
suggestion.
And speaking of patrons, you can suggest nonprofits for us to donate to if you become a patron, and you also get ad-free episodes and extra episodes and lots of benefits. And you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/resolvedmysteriespodcast, and it really helps support the show. And we're just going to get started. We have a two-part Season 4, Episode 11 coming for you. So in this first part, Karlin, what are you covering?
We have a Lost Loves, and we've got 2 Barbra Anns.
And then I have an unexplained death. It is the unexplained death of Jeffrey Digman.
Next week, we'll have part 2, and I have a special alert segment about a church arsonist in Florida.
And then we've got a treasure, honey.
Yeah.
And it's the Trabuco treasure.
All right.
Okay, let's go.
Let's do it.
All right, starting it out with a Lost Loves about a couple Barbras. Stack says, for adopted children, the search for a natural parent can last a lifetime. In this unusual story, 2 women named Barbra are both looking for their mother. Remarkably, the 2 Barbras are longtime best friends who discovered as adults that they had far more in common than they could have ever imagined.
Crazy.
Also, giving it away
I know.
at the beginning.
Well, not quite, but
Spoily
Yeah.
spoiler.
kind of. So cut that. Okay. Barbra Smith grew up in Los Angeles in the 1940s. When she was 5 years old, Barbra had one of those unfortunate childhood experiences which would forever change her life. So they cut to a reenactment of Barbra and another little girl walking home from school. And the other little girl is a full-on dick bitch.
Ooh.
And she says, your own mother didn't want you, and that's why she gave you up. My mother told me so.
Ugh.
You know who else is a dick bitch? That mother.
Yeah, really.
That mother is also a dick bitch. It runs in the fam.
Tell your kids things like that about other kids.
Yeah, extremely inappropriate.
Yes.
So poor Barbra runs away sobbing, of course. And Barbra Smith is interviewed in adulthood, and she says, that's when it rang clear to me that it could be used in a very vicious, hurtful way. Someone had given me up, and even though I had known the security and love of my own family, it was a time of, well, what happened? What really did happen? She says this is when she had her first real feelings of what it meant to be adopted, which is so sad because she grew up knowing she was adopted and didn't have a problem until this little dick bitch of a little girl ruined her idea of what was going on.
Yeah.
So Barbra says she remembered being told by her parents, Jack and Rose, which, Titanic much?
Oh, my.
She was told by her parents, Jack and Rose, that she had been adopted. Barbra says it never bothered her until the day her best friend began to ridicule her. And then I'm like, that little dick bitch was her best friend? Oh my gosh, the worst. So apparently that night, Barbra was inconsolable, which is just so sad. And so the parents asked the family doctor, Maurice Sultan, to come talk to her, which I was like, that's weird. But then it all makes sense because Dr. Sultan is an actual honey, and he tells Barbra, I'm the doctor that delivered you when you were born. And he says her birth father had died during World War II, and her birth mother had died right after she was born.
Ugh.
And she is too clever for that shit. And she's like, I don't believe you. She just straight up tells him, I don't believe you. And he goes, well, why don't you just get some sleep? He's like, shit, it didn't work. So he's not very good at this, but he is a honey and he did try.
He really tried.
So then Barbra says her dad came in, and again, these adoptive parents are her parents. Like, she loves them. They are good to her. And so the dad comes in and he's trying to console her, and he says, Barbra, you know that everybody is gone, meaning like her parents have passed away. And she said, I know my real family is alive, and you know that too, Daddy.
Wow.
She is just like,
Barbra
way
is
too smart for all
not
these adults.
taking no for an answer.
And the dad also didn't know what to do, so he just kissed her goodnight and left the room.
Oh, man.
So when Barbra was a teenager, and they show a photo of her, and she is so beautiful. When she was a teen, her dad brought out her adoption papers. From the papers, Barbra learned that her birth mother's name was Victoria Baumgartner. Barbra says it didn't say anywhere in the papers that her mother had died in childbirth, just like she'd been told. And she says she saw her mother's signature on the paper and just stared at it forever because it was like the only connection she had to her mother's existence.
I know that feeling when you see writing of someone's and you're like, this person was right here touching this paper.
Yes. It's a very real, like, connection.
Yeah.
It was then that she began thinking again that she knew her parents were out there. She says she didn't know who or what, but she knew something was out there. In 1957, Barbra met a young man named Steve Reed, and the two would fall in love and eventually get engaged. And just as a side note, if you're doing the math, she is 17. So, you know,
There's
it's the
that.
50s. Stack says, one afternoon, Steve and Barbra went to visit Steve's friend, Pie Ratner, which is what my subtitle said. Is that what yours said?
I don't remember.
The name Pie, P-I-E?
I hope so.
I mean, I love it. I love pie.
As a side note, my next door neighbor's name is Pie, so.
Really?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but like P-I.
Oh, neat.
A male or female?
A female, but Pie like the number.
Like the
Weird,
number.
yeah.
Not like
Yeah.
the dessert.
So they go to Pie Ratner's house, and Barbra was startled by a portrait hanging in the living room. She says the portrait looked almost just like her. And Pie says, yeah, that's my sister Barb. Remember I told you how much you guys look alike?
Weird.
So Barbara Smith Reed says, I looked at that portrait and I thought, well, he's right. She does resemble me. How interesting. So at one point, they're gathering in the dining room, and the sister Barbra comes down. She's leaving, and so they're introduced, and Barbra thinks to herself, wow, she really does look like me.
Weird.
So then we've got an interview with Barbra Ratner Basanti, and she says, quote, we met and it was just instant like. You know how sometimes you meet somebody and you feel like you've known them for a long time? Stack says the two Barbras soon became the best of friends, and they married two best friends, so the couples were soon inseparable.
So nice.
A dream.
It's so nice. Barbara Smith says they became really close and they shared lots of life's events. They raised their children together, and they were Aunt Barbra to each other's children.
Aww.
So Barbara Smith says Barbra Ratner never knew that she was adopted, but Barbra had been told that Barbra Ratner was adopted. So it was just something she knew about, but they weren't supposed to talk about.
Weird.
Oh, okay.
But she told Barbra about her own adoption and the name of her birth mother. She said she asked a couple questions, but that was it. There was never really any more thought about it until Barbra Ratner's mother passed away. Stack explains in 1966, Barbra Ratner's mother died and her father decided to sell the house. While they were packing, Barbra found a box of mementos from her childhood. In the box, Barbra finds her own adoption papers, which is just like a wild way to find that out.
Mm-hmm. And the father's still alive, so they don't even talk about how she has to confront him about this.
Totally. And he should have known that shit was in there. Jeez, man. So she starts looking at her adoption papers, and she sees her birth mother's last name was Baumgartner, which was the same last name as Barbara Smith's birth mother.
Can you imagine?
Barbra says she was dumbfounded. She had no idea she was adopted. And she says a few minutes later, she started reading the correspondence. There was a paragraph where they started describing the mother as healthy, and it described that she had already had one daughter who was living in Beverly Hills and in good health. She says she just knew instantly that it was Barbra.
Oh my gosh.
She called Barbra on the phone and asked her again what her birth mother's name was. She said Victoria Baumgartner. Barbra told her that she wasn't going to believe it, but that she was baby girl Baumgartner. Then she says there was a long pause, and the other Barbra just said, "I'll get back to you," and hung up. So Barbra Smith called her adopted parents, and her father agreed to call Dr. Sultan, who confirmed that Barbra Smith and Barbara Ratner were indeed sisters.
Oh my God. This
dream.
doctor has all the hot goss.
Yeah.
He knows
I know, and he's got to be
everything.
old at this point. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I know. The Barbras, they're sisters."
Yeah.
Quote, "It was just the most wonderful thing to me. I mean, your best friend is your sister.
Dream.
And that couldn't be more wonderful."
That's so nice.
She says she ran to Barbara's children and said, "But I'm really Auntie Barbra. I'm really Auntie Barbra," which is just so nice.
It's too nice.
So Stack then says that the two Barbras were overjoyed. In 1967, they went to Dr. Sultan with questions. He gave them a little bit of info, but withheld most of it. Then, before he died in 1989, Dr. Sultan destroyed all records from their adoptions.
Why?
He was literally taking it to the grave. Barbra says he was close to her parents, so he didn't say much. So it was like out of respect to their wishes.
To the adopted parents, I guess.
Yeah. Barbra goes on to say that she knows Dr. Sultan must have been devastated because he was close to the family, and she said to do all of the arrangements. So we've talked about that before, but the doctor at that time would be the one to set up the adoption, which is just
so
wild.
weird.
So strange. Mm-hmm.
So it was his job to protect his patient, which was their mother.
Mm-hmm.
So the Barbras contacted the Children's Home Society of California, and they began to get some of the history of their past. They learned that in 1940, an unmarried 23-year-old Victoria Baumgartner arrived in Los Angeles. She'd come to Dr. Sultan because she was pregnant and needed help. July 31st, a baby girl was born and adopted by Jack and Rose Smith and named Barbara Ann. 15 months later, Victoria gave birth to a second daughter. Stack says, in an absolute mind-boggling coincidence, the two sisters grew up 5 miles apart.
Oh my God.
5 miles. Quote, each was named Barbara Ann. And that's not that weird to me because it was the 40s and 50s and there's got to be like a bajillion. And each was raised by an adoptive mother named Rose.
I mean, that's weird.
They then show a side-by-side of the two Barbras in their teen years, and it's wild. They look so much alike. Mm-hmm. The mother's genes are definitely strong because they have different fathers. Well, I assume. I guess I don't really know that. But they didn't mention anything about birth father on the papers. Mm-hmm. Barbra Smith says that they started to compare facts and dates, and there were so many odd similarities. Even some of their clothes were similar, which, again, I was like, I mean...
They shop at the same store.
They wore saddle shoes?
There's only so many department stores. But Barbra says that she doesn't even think a lot of twins have as many similarities as they do. She wraps it up by saying the weirdest facts are that they married best friends and are best friends.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that they were friends first. It's so nice.
It's
so nice. And like, it maybe isn't that crazy that they crossed paths living so close together, but it's also Los Angeles. There's a lot of people.
That's true.
So,
and you meet a lot of people that you wouldn't be friends with.
Yeah.
totally.
Like best friends with.
Like, that to me is truly, like, kismet. Like, these people were drawn to each other somehow.
Yeah.
So then I was kind of wondering, like, is this a reverse lost loves where we found out they already knew each other?
Right.
Like, how is this a lost loves? But then Stack is finally like, they're looking for their birth mother, Victoria. So then we get the old one screen update. And it says, as a result of the broadcast, the two Barbras were reunited with their birth mother and happily shared their story of unusual friendship.
Aww.
So, try as I might.
No.
How many Barbara Anns do you think are boomers?
8 million.
Approximately a bajillion. So, it is impossible to find these ladies. But I do have a little blurb from Fandom that says, several viewers led the women to Victoria Baumgartner. They have since been reunited with her. However, because she had not told anyone about having 2 children while single, the broadcast was not allowed to show their reunion.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
The women, however, thanked the viewers for allowing them to finally meet her.
Aww.
And then it said, sadly, Barbara Smith died on December 28th, 2013.
Oh.
So I did find, so that was Barbara Smith Reed, and she was 73 at the time of her death. But that was literally the only piece of information I could find.
Wow. Oh, man. Well, I'm glad
And
they were
again, probably
reunited.
because the mom wanted privacy about
Sure.
it, so
Yeah.
they didn't have news articles or anything.
I'm
Yeah.
so curious, though. Like, then does the mom have a family? Did the mom, like, do the Barbras have other siblings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Ah, crazy.
Wow.
Probably.
Oh, I love that one. It's so nice.
That's
It's
so
so,
good.
nice. It's just the nicest thing in the world. It really is a reverse lost love.
Yes. And they found their mom, too. So
Yeah.
it's just
And they
like
found
good
their mom,
news. Yeah.
And I'm glad she was still alive when they were looking for her.
Yeah. And that she wanted to meet them.
Totally. And just the interviews with the two of them, you could just see how much they love each other. They were just the cutest.
Yes.
Yes. Love
All the
it.
side glances and stuff. So cute.
During quarantine, my family and I had to come up with indoor activities to keep us sane. One of the solutions to the endless hours indoors was working on puzzles together. We probably did about 1 a week, which meant I was always on the hunt for a good puzzle. That's when I found Unidragon. Unidragon wooden puzzles are gorgeously crafted and simply beautiful. Each puzzle piece has its own unique shape, and we're not talking traditional puzzle shapes here. They are so cool. The puzzles also have an incredibly colorful design. They are so gorgeous. Unidragon puzzles make the perfect gift for your partner, kids, friends, and even harder to buy for people like coworkers and extended family. Each puzzle is packed in a premium wooden gift box, and they have a new design released every month, so there are loads of options to choose from. These puzzles are not your average puzzles. They definitely have a wow factor to them, and they're basically little works of art. It is so hard to choose one, but I went with the fox because my daughter loves foxes and she absolutely loved it. These puzzles are so special. They make an incredible gift, which is why it's so awesome that Unidragon is giving 10% off to Resolve Mysteries listeners. So start checking off your holiday gift list and head over to unidragon.com and use the promo code SOLVED to get 10% off of your purchase. That's unidragon.com, promo code SOLVED for 10% off of your purchase. Okay, the second segment of Season 4, Episode 11, is the unexplained death of Jeffrey Digman. So Stack intros the segment by saying that from the time he was 10 years old, Jeffrey Digman wanted to be a Marine. He signed up while he was still in college and was accepted into Officers Candidate School. William Digman, Jeffrey's father, says that he was very even-tempered. He spoke very softly and very quietly. He was a clean type of individual, and everything had to be just perfect. He was a very organized individual who knew what he wanted and directed all of his efforts and attention into achieving that. Donna Digman comes on, who's Jeffrey's mother. Donna says that since Jeffrey was such an athletic kid, he thought that it was very macho to be a Marine, and that's why he chose the Marines.
Oh, boy.
She says he thought he could do it, and he could. And it's so sad because they both just seem so proud of him. Mm-hmm. So at the age of 28, Jeffrey Digman was promoted to captain and stationed in his hometown of San Diego. In late June of 1988, he and another officer pooled their money together and bought a house together.
Wow.
That's cool. Like, let's normalize buying homes with your friends.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
But also, they're in the military, so...
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, if they purchased that home, we find out that Jeffrey was transferred, and I don't think he thought he was going to be. So just 4 months later, in November of 1988, Digman was transferred to Puerto Rico. And according to friends, Digman initially was unhappy about the transfer, but by Christmas, which is only a month later, he had begun to settle in and was dating a woman named Lucy Garcia, an accountant on the base. Lucy says that Jeffrey was a very quiet person and he was so serious, and she liked that about him. Lucy says that Jeffrey told her that he was going to take 2 weeks off and go back home and, quote, fix some things, like work on his income tax papers, which I thought was a little weird. Stack says that just after the holidays, Digman spent 2 weeks in his home in San Diego. He was scheduled to fly back to Puerto Rico on January 22nd, 1989, Super Bowl Sunday, lest we forget the holiest of holidays. Oh, Super Bowl Sunday, 1988. Yeah, I remember. Or 1989. Like, what the hell? Why even throw that in there?
People who do.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they remember.
I wonder if the house thing, Karlin was like, he's in the military. Like, he would live on the base. But I think a lot of military people then don't gain credit because of being in the military for so long, or like investments. So I wonder if it was just like an investment too for him and his friend.
I wasn't even saying because he would normally live on the base. I was just saying the odds of him having to move are high.
I thought that too.
Yeah, but maybe that's too why it's just an investment. I don't know.
Well, and they also said too, at some point they called the place that they bought the house, like they specifically called it a civilian neighborhood. And then I saw someone comment like, that's a weird thing to say because like so many people in San Diego were in the military, so for them to specifically cite it. But then I read that he didn't live in San Diego. He lived in like a city 45 minutes away from San Diego. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, okay. They're just saying he didn't live on the base.
So I don't know why they kept saying that. Maybe just as a frame of reference. So here we are. It's January 22nd, 1989, Super Bowl Sunday. Never forget.
Best day ever.
So at halftime of Super Bowl Sunday, a neighbor saw Digman return home. Digman's roommate, a major in the Marine Corps, had gone to Las Vegas for the weekend with his girlfriend. At 6 p.m., neighbors heard what they thought was a car backfiring. And at 10 p.m., the major returned home from Las Vegas and was surprised to see Jeffrey Digman's car still there because Digman's flight to Puerto Rico had been scheduled to depart 15 minutes earlier. Investigator Henry Sawicki of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department says that when the roommate returned with his girlfriend, they noticed that the house appeared to have someone in it. The lights were on, the garage door was open, and so they were concerned. The roommate and his girlfriend went across the street to get some neighbors, which I think is odd, and I'll come back to it, but wouldn't you have just assumed that he took a different flight?
Yeah. He missed his flight
If I was in that position, my roommate was still home, I would have assumed that he missed his flight, and I definitely wouldn't have gone to my neighbor to be like, hey, I think this is weird. I
wouldn't have assumed the worst, probably.
No, absolutely not. So Stack says that the major persuaded his neighbor to go inside the house with him, and the neighbor found Jeffrey's body in his bedroom. Digman was dead of a single bullet shot wound to his right temple. Digman's blood alcohol level was measured at 0.24, 3 times more than the legal limit. So I was like, wow, that seems super drunk. And it is. When you're at 0.24, it causes disorientation, the help to stand and walk, vomiting, and blackouts.
Wow, okay.
So Digman's death was ruled a suicide. Henry Sawicki says they determined it was a suicide after talking to his acquaintances and from the physical evidence on the scene. He said that there was gunshot residue on Digman's hand, indicating that Digman had fired the gun with his right hand. William Digman says that he never believed that Jeffrey had ended his own life. He says that he always believed that he was murdered, and that's what the evidence shows. Stack says that the Naval Investigative Services backed up the coroner's ruling of suicide. Unconvinced, Bill and Donna Digman hired several experts and began their own investigation, quote, which not only took on a life of its own, but soon took over their lives as well. Which is so sad. We've seen this in so many other segments. Parents convinced that their children didn't take their own lives, and it just becomes an obsession for them. Their entire life then becomes structured around proving that their child did not take their own life.
Instead of being able to heal, accept and heal. And of course, sometimes they haven't taken their own lives, but yeah.
So Stack says that the Digmans collected information on their son's case for over a year. In Jeffrey Digman's childhood bedroom, they painstakingly recreated the scene of Jeffrey's death using the actual furniture from the scene, which is heartbreaking. Yeah. And then they show Bill recreating his son's death on the bed, presumably on the bed where Jeffrey died. Private investigator Ted Gunderson helps him out. Gunderson says that he determined the trajectory of the bullet. Bill then gets on the bed and gets into the position that Jeffrey was found on the bed. He said he's the same height as his son, and he sits up and demonstrates that for the bullet to have gone into Jeffrey's head at that angle, he would have been sitting in a contorted position. The other thing that Bill brings up is that Jeffrey was left-handed. He shows that Jeffrey would have had to have held his gun in a contorted position to where he's sort of leaning off of the bed. And Bill says that if he had shot himself, he would have fallen onto the floor, not onto the bed. Stack then says that powder burns were found on Digman's right and left hands. There was also a drop of blood running down Jeffrey's cheek, which means that he was not in an upright position for at least 7 seconds after the gunshot wound was inflicted. Police photographs taken at the scene also revealed an abrasion on Digman's cheek and a contusion on his elbow. Above Jeffrey's head on the turnback sheet was an unexplained smear of blood. So his parents hired Steve Schliebe, an independent forensic expert, to review the case. Schliebe says that he doesn't think that Jeffrey took his own life. He thinks that there was a struggle and that Jeffrey was shot during the struggle. 10 months after Jeffrey's death, his parents exhumed his body and had a second autopsy performed with their observers present. The Naval Institute performed a second autopsy and found 2 injuries not mentioned in the first autopsy: contusions on his left elbow and contusions on the middle finger of his left hand. However, the autopsy stated that these injuries were insignificant and there was no evidence of a homicide. The Digmans continued to believe that their son had been murdered. They believed that Jeffrey's death was somehow related to his tenure with the San Diego Marine Drug Testing Unit. For 7 months in 1988, before he was transferred to Puerto Rico, Digman had served as chief of the unit. Bill says that people were dealing drugs and that people were testing positive. Jeffrey would write his reports about what the results of the investigations were, but the people were never disciplined or discharged, and Jeffrey was upset about it. Donna says that Jeffrey was holding onto test results and military documents in a safe in his bedroom at his home because he wanted to prove that he was doing his job even though no one was being disciplined. Donna says that when they tried to remove the safe from Jeffrey's desk, the cabinet door it was stored in came off in their hands because the cabinet door hinges were no longer connected to the desk and the safe was missing.
Ooh.
Yeah. Bill says that they, which I guess is the Naval Institute, took the safe. Stack says that there's another final puzzling proscript in the case. When Lucy Garcia helped the Marines pack Jeffrey's things in Puerto Rico, one of the items was a small green-backed diary. Lucy says that when she gave the book to the Marine in charge of the packing, she saw that all the pages were in the book. Donna says that when they found it in Jeffrey's things, the pages were cut out of it. Bill says it's been difficult thinking about it all of this time, with the mock-up there, so close. It's a constant reminder that he's dead. But Bill says he has a job to do, and he's not going to give up until he finds out why his son is dead. Stack then finishes the segment up by saying 2 months ago, so I guess this is in 1992, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology received the autopsy reports and changed the cause of death to undetermined. Although the although the Naval Investigative Service and the Riverside County, California Sheriff's Department, basically they disagreed with the ruling. However, they said they would welcome new evidence pertinent to the case and possibly reopen their investigation. So basically, they were like, cool, but we don't care.
Right.
We still say that it's a suicide.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So this case is like a head scratcher because I do think that most of these not a suicide cases are in fact a suicide, with the exception of when the military is involved.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So usually I think it's Occam's razor. I remember the one girl, the teenage girl who shot herself, and her parents said that she didn't, but she probably did, you know.
Yeah.
But we've seen a couple cases now where the military was involved and this person either died by suicide or just quote unquote disappeared.
And they're packing their things
And
up.
they're packing their things immediately. So, first of all, to no one's surprise, this case has never been solved, mainly because the military doesn't believe that there's anything to solve. The Marine Corps officials maintain that Jeffrey Digman shot himself with his own .44 Magnum revolver. So I read some really great articles, and most of the information I'm going to provide comes from a 1990 article in the LA Times and then a 1993 article from the Philadelphia Inquirer. So it's hard to get a read on who exactly Jeffrey Digman was. There are a lot of conflicting reports as to what he was like. While he served as a substance abuse control officer who counseled others on drugs and alcohol, he himself was found dead with a blood alcohol level of .24.
Right.
And apparently, while Digman didn't really drink publicly, friends said that he drank heavily in his own bedroom, which is very sad. And while touted as a young man with a bright future by his superiors, he was also nicknamed Dr. Gloom by his fellow Marines.
Oh.
So in evaluation reports, Digman is described as conscientious, honest, hardworking, intelligent, sincere, loyal, resourceful, and tireless. Only 3 months before his death, his supervisor wrote that Digman had, quote, a bright future in the Marine Corps and is someone who I'd like to seek to work with again. Some of the men who served in Digman's company at the Marine Corps recruit depot said that he was an inspiring and caring leader. However, Gemma Riddle, Digman's girlfriend at the time, Digman had 3 girlfriends at the time. He had 2 in the United States and then Lucy Garcia in Puerto Rico.
Oh, my.
I mean, he was very handsome. He had the ladies. So Gemma Riddle, who was one of Digman's girlfriends at the time, said that Digman drank himself to sleep every night.
Oh, God.
Quote, what worried me was that he was drinking too much. And apparently, Digman was also having issues with his roommate, Major Douglas K. Wood, who was also Digman's superior, who wrote the review about him where he said that he would like to work with him again. That was actually his roommate and his superior.
That's not good.
It's the roommate element to me is very strange. I feel iffy about Wood because there's some red flags there. Like I said, why would he go to the neighbor to come into the house to help him just because the garage door was open and the lights were on?
Yeah.
His girlfriend at the time, who he was in Vegas with, Sherry Miller, had said that she saw someone moving around the house. So wouldn't they just assume that it was
His car
Digman?
was there.
Yes. His car's there. Someone's moving around the house.
I was assuming there wasn't a car or
No,
something.
the garage door was open. That was it. The garage door was open and the lights were on.
What in the world?
And that's a thing that murderers do.
Yes, because they're like, I know that I can't act on the 911 call either. So I need someone else to find it, and then I'll play off their reaction.
Exactly. Yeah. And then they'll see me react, and they'll say, oh,
yes,
we were so surprised. And from what I read, the neighbor went over. I don't have his name, but the wife came too. And then the 4 of them went into the house, but Wood had the women stay in the foyer. And wouldn't you go right to Digman's room if you were Wood? But the neighbor found Digman. Wood didn't go to Digman's room. The neighbor did. And who knows how, maybe the neighbor had never been there before. He's just he says in the reenactment, oh, I checked all the rooms. Where the hell was Wood?
Right. And who's going to know better than Wood what room he's probably hanging out in?
Exactly. If he drinks in his room by himself all the time, he's most likely in his room. So, and it also seems like Wood and Digman weren't getting along at the time. After Digman and Wood purchased the home together in June of 1987, According to Wood, Digman, quote, exhibited obsessive possessiveness toward his house and possessions. However, Digman's parents stated that most of the furniture and the items in the house were Digman's, and that Wood may have moved his girlfriend in without Digman's permission. Before Digman left Puerto Rico in January, he told friends that he was angry with Wood, but didn't elaborate why. Also strange is that there's a record of Digman telling his friends that he was expecting Wood to give him a ride to the airport on Sunday, January 22nd, so that he could return to Puerto Rico. But in the UM segment, Wood says that he arrived home 15 minutes after Digman should have left on the flight. Another strange aspect is that Wood changed his story about Digman's behavior around the time of his death. So in sworn testimony, Wood told NIS investigators that his housemate potentially needed professional help because, quote, he was going through life with too much stress. Wood also said that he was, quote, worried about ruining Captain Digman's career if he turned him in for substance abuse, or that, even if he did turn him in, it would cause Captain Digman to commit suicide. However, in the same year, when the LA Times reached out to Wood and asked him about these statements, he told the LA Times that Digman did not have a drinking problem, nor did he appear suicidal or depressed. Quote, there wasn't any time I felt he was suicidal, Wood said. So it's like a completely different story, only a couple months later. However, I did read a comment on the unsolved.com message board, and a user named Boz commented, yes, this could be a military cover-up, but it was not the roommate. I was the roommate of Jeff's roommate, this guy Douglas. I was the last person to speak to Jeff. He called my apartment looking for our roommates and didn't have a ride to the San Diego airport to go back to Puerto Rico. I offered to drive the hour north to come get him, but I had to have left within 30 minutes, and he never called me back. Jeff was a bit of a strange bird, which is why his roommate was on edge when he got home, due to many past experiences, and he saw the light on, etc. So I don't know. You know, maybe Digman was just a really weird dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe he was like, if he missed his flight, he's going to be fucking mad, or I don't know.
Or he's really drunk in there.
Yeah.
Maybe. And, like, I doubt that Wood had anything to do with it, but there's, like, super weirdness there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weirdness around the death of Jeffrey Digman. So Rick Bogan, who was a deputy coroner with the Riverside County Coroner's Office, he examined Digman's body on January 22nd, 1989, the night of his death. He's quoted in the LA Times as saying, quote, there were a lot of unanswered questions and circumstances we couldn't account for, but we had to conclude it was probably suicide, which is weird.
You don't have to conclude. You don't have to settle on a conclusion.
Yeah, you can just say it's undetermined.
Yeah.
And then when asked why, under those circumstances, Bogan did not call the cause of death undetermined. He explained, quote, it wasn't just me. Based on everything we gathered, it seemed more strongly probable that it was suicide. We aren't trying to cover anything up. We just haven't uncovered anything. So, I don't know.
Okay.
However, there are a lot of questionable circumstances, some of which were mentioned in UM. Digman was left-handed, yet he was shot above his right ear. The weapon found at the scene was a .44 Magnum revolver, yet the wound itself was relatively small, inconsistent with that kind of powerful gun. Though it is rare for a left-handed person to use his less dexterous hand, in most cases to steady his aim then, he would have put the gun up against his head, which would have created a large star-shaped contact wound. The first coroner's report described the wound as, quote, near contact, and said it was not star-shaped. So if you are left-handed but you're using your right hand to shoot yourself, you're going to hold your hand because your weaker hand isn't going to be steady.
Right.
So that's what they're saying, and, like, he wouldn't have done that. For the trajectory of the bullet to line up with Digman's body, he would have been forced into an awkward position. If he had been sitting on the bed, the path of the bullet would have been about 10 inches above his head, missing his head. For Digman's body to line up with the bullet's trajectory, he would have had to have been leaning well over off of the bed and then would have fallen to the floor, not backward onto the bed. While Digman was lying in a pool of blood with both hands by his sides, there was that blood smear on the sheets well above his head. and experts cannot figure out how it got there.
Do you know what this is reminding me so much of?
What?
Culpable.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
This
I can
is
see that.
very similar.
The podcast Culpable?
It's a similar situation where a young man is determined to suicide, but their roommates are the ones that found him, and there are a lot of things that don't add up, including blood not dripping in the right direction and things like that, and like which hand it was, and
yeah, that's great. You should listen to that podcast, Alison.
I'm surprised I haven't.
Crazy.
So the blood spatter on the wall behind Digman is inconsistent with the bullet's trajectory. Digman also had a cut on his right cheekbone and bruises on his right elbow and left middle finger. Again, the safe was missing from Digman's desk, and the hinges were torn off the door.
Where would that be?
The bullet itself went through Digman's head, but was never found. The mattress was disposed of immediately after Digman's death and not examined, so it's not known whether a bullet might have lodged in there. In fact, experts do not know with certainty that the gun found by Digman's feet was the one used in his death. So Jeffrey's parents, William and Donna, spent over $85,000 in the early 90s hiring independent examiners, and many of them felt as though Digman was murdered.
Yeah.
Dr. Vincent J. DeMaio, a chief medical examiner in San Antonio, was a consultant on the case. He said, quote, "The problem is that when you look at the case, there are a number of little factors that are bothersome. It's not a contact wound, and most suicides are. He's left-handed. Well, sometimes they shoot themselves on the right, but it's not common. This is one case where you can explain every little thing, but after a while, those little things begin to pile up. I can explain everything, but when you've got 6 or 8, then you have to say, wait, we have a problem." Dr. Cyril Wecht even worked on this case. Wecht is a clinical professor of pathology, or was, at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and the former president of the American Academy of Forensic Science. I'm sure you're familiar with Cyril Wecht. He's like the OG when it comes to forensics, and he's worked on Robert F. Kennedy assassination, the Tate LaBianca murders. He's always popping up on the Dateline podcast. He's everywhere. So Wecht says, there are several things that are puzzling from a hard technical standpoint. I am quite disturbed by the fact that the gunshot wound is in the right temple and the captain was left-handed. It doesn't make it physically impossible, but it is something rarely seen. People don't stand on their heads and engage in gymnastic contortions when they shoot themselves.
I just can't even imagine trying to shoot myself with my left hand. Like,
No, I mean,
in
no.
what? I just can't think of a scenario that you would choose to do that.
I don't know. So then I found, because then I was like, what? This is crazy. Blah, blah. So I found this totally bananas article written in 1993, and it's about the Philadelphia Inquirer investigating the military frequently claiming that many officer deaths are suicides. So I'm just going to read you from this article. The first thing I'm going to read you is an example of another officer, quote, suicide, according to the Marines. Okay.
No.
On a late winter evening in March of 1992, military policeman Chad Langford radioed the security center at a sprawling Army arsenal in Alabama that he was stopping to assist a stranded motorist. Seconds later, the radio went dead. An MP dispatched to investigate found Langford's patrol car, its hazard lights flashing, and its engine running on a remote gravel road outlined in pale moonlight. Next to the car, the MP said later he saw a lot of blood. On the road beneath the car's open front door lay Chad Langford, 20, dying in the dark of a gunshot to his right temple.
Oh my God.
Langford's blood-stained MP cap was stuffed into his mouth. His handcuffs dangled from his left wrist. The lanyard cord from his holster was wrapped around his ankles, and his car radio cable was knotted around his neck. And Langford's .45 caliber service pistol, which had been fired twice, lay under his left shoulder. 2 days later, despite the bizarre death scene and before the completion of any lab tests, a military pathologist issued a ruling. Chad Langford had committed suicide.
Why?
Langford's father was stunned by the news. Just 10 days earlier, Jim Langford said his son had told him his life had been threatened while he was on an undercover drug investigation. Months later, Langford's grief and shock turned to outrage. An Army report said that Chad Langford staged his own death to make it appear that he had been murdered. But the report also said something else. The Army could not determine whether Chad Langford's fingerprints were on the gun or whether he had fired the gun at all.
Oh my
And
gosh.
unidentified fingerprints were found on his radio, the NPR band, and the handcuffs.
Oh my God.
Chad Langford's father says, quote, "I think they got this boy wrapped up in a drug investigation that got him killed, and now they don't want to take responsibility for it. And I think they're covering something up big time."
Oh, that's awful.
So, in 1993, more than 14 families spoke to the Philadelphia Inquirer about the deaths of their loved ones that the military claimed were suicides. After the expose ran, 26 more families came forward and told their stories to the Inquirer as well.
Oh.
So the Inquirer then writes, I think maybe 6 or 8 different examples from these families of their sons, quote, committing suicide, and they all sound similar to this story that I just told you. So the Inquirer review found that investigators lost or destroyed important evidence, mishandled death weapons, failed to perform routine forensic tests, or to follow up leads. They also misquoted witnesses and filed misleading reports.
God.
In some cases, the review found evidence to support the contentions of some of the families that their loved ones were murdered. 4 retired military investigators who reviewed 19 of the cases for the Inquirer said the evidence did not fully support rulings of self-inflicted deaths. They said military commanders, eager to avoid what one expert called, quote, black marks on their record, often pressed for quick resolution of cases involving violent death. The Inquirer review also found that in most cases, investigators assumed suicide almost from the moment the victims were found dead. The investigative files suggested that in some cases, that agents tailored reports to support such a ruling of suicide and downplayed any evidence to the contrary. In the 13 of the 40 cases reviewed by the Inquirer, the servicemen died within weeks of complaining about conditions in the military, arguing or fighting with fellow servicemen, or after they had been investigated for crimes or violations of military policy.
Gross.
In 10 of the cases, family members said the victim had told them of stumbling across drug trafficking or weapons smuggling aboard ships or on bases.
Oh my God.
So it is entirely possible that Digman did come across something while he was doing these drug tests and being a drug counselor.
Yeah.
And maybe he was murdered. When you read all of this, and then I read, so again, this article is in 1993. Since 1979, the military has ruled that 1,460 deaths were homicide. More than twice that many deaths, 3,375, were ruled self-inflicted. From October 1992 to June 1993, the number of deaths ruled self-inflicted was more than triple the number of ruled homicides. 194 suicides to 62 homicides. That, just doesn't fit your average statistic of violent crime in the United States.
No.
In this article, though, the military argued that parents never want to admit when their child has taken their own life, so they blame the military and create conspiracies. I mean, it does seem pretty sus, though, because those other, 6 or 8 deaths that they described with the specific officers, it didn't really seem like they had taken their own life.
No.
Yeah. Oh gosh, especially that first one.
Yeah,
way.
totally. So again, the article is from 1993. In the years between then and now, we have heard countless stories of the military covering up sexual assaults, sexual harassment, possible murders. There
People
are
going missing, just never being found again.
There are the puzzling and mysterious deaths at Fort Hood, where dozens of people were killed, died by suicide, or went missing from the Texas military base just last year alone.
Yeah.
Dozens of people just at Fort Hood. There was the friendly fire death of Pat Tillman and the fully fabricated story that the military tried to sell to the Tillman's family and the American public. Then there's the horrific 2005 story of Laverna Johnson, who was a private first class in the United States Army. The Army called her death a suicide, but an autopsy report and photographs revealed that Johnson had a broken nose, black eye, loose teeth, burns from a corrosive chemical on her genitals, and a gunshot wound that seemed inconsistent with suicide.
But yeah, she just beat herself up.
She beat herself up and poured corrosive chemicals all over her vagina before she took her own life, obviously.
Disgusting.
Oh my God. Well, and do you remember the Ralph Ziegler? I can't remember if that was season 1 or 2.
Yeah.
But
another perfect
same thing,
example.
where they're like,
same thing.
Suicide, but he was like beaten and...
Yep. So, like, there's totally shady shit going on. And, you know, when it comes to the military, like, what they do, nothing surprises me. So I wouldn't be surprised if Digman was murdered.
Yeah, no.
Cover-ups notwithstanding, suicides have always been an issue in the military. The rates were highest during Vietnam, and actually, they're at their highest right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that, too, when you were talking about, like, the ratio. Like,
Yeah.
well, it is the military, and it's really difficult.
Totally. I was shocked to find an article from NPR.org that was just written this past June in 2021. The article said a new report on U.S. military deaths contains a stark statistic. An estimated 7,057 service members had died during military operations since 9/11, while suicide among active duty personnel and veterans of those conflicts have reached 30,177.
Oh my God.
The military argues that suicides are on the rise everywhere in the United States and that most people who take their lives are young people and men, and the military is predominantly made up of young people and men, so they say the numbers aren't that surprising.
When was that stat from?
June of 2021,
Okay.
just last month or a couple months ago. And then it's from the amount of suicides from 9/11, people that were in Iraq, Afghanistan, active military service members.
Okay.
I mean, that's wild.
It's wild.
We'll never know what actually happened to Digman. No one's ever going to say. No one's ever going to tell if he was murdered, if not. There were, people were speculating that Wood may not have killed him, but knew that it was going to happen,
Right.
which is why he took himself out of town.
Right.
Why he went to get the neighbor as sort of like a witness to the discovery of the body. Which is possible because Wood was, higher up in the food chain than Digman was.
Yeah.
He might have been told to do it to cover it up, too.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, but it just reminds us, and we say this every time we have a case like this, the military can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
With no accountability. And that is truly terrifying.
Yes.
So scary.
Oh, wow. Good job.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
what happened? It's so
I know.
sad.
I know.
Either
It's
way,
wild.
it's so sad.
I know.
And then
Yeah.
with the military in those articles saying, well, suicide's on the rise everywhere. So do they post responses to here's what we're doing to help the mental
That's
health
what I
of
was
our
gonna
service
say.
members?
You need to then say, oh, we have a problem.
Yes.
Well, they claim that they do, that they provide mental health services, but I mean, it's widely known that they don't.
No.
And it's widely known that even if they do provide those services, the culture of the military
Right.
looks down on, you're seen as weak.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the articles that I read in the LA Times said, well, no one believes that Digman killed himself because that's just not what a Marine does. A Marine fights to the death. A Marine, and it's like, that was from
Disgusting.
93. Or 1990, but it's like, dude, no. Like, do not make that the narrative because then no one is going to seek any help. If you tell men
Right.
that because they're Marines, they have to fight and be strong and this and that, it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So toxic.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah, it was rough. I just totally fell into a rabbit hole, reading about all of these servicemen who, put their life on their line for us, come home, and then are given no tools for success, no tools to deal with their PTSD. And it's awful. It really is.
It is.
Oh, good job. That's rough.
Good job. All right, so everybody, come on back next week for part 2 of this episode. We're going to be talking about a little special alert.
Oh, we've got a church arsonist.
And a treasure, Trabuco treasure.
Can't wait.
Go to patreon.com/Resolved Mysteries Podcast if you're interested in supporting us there. If you subscribe at the $5 a month level or higher, you're going to get ad-free episodes, 2 extra episodes a month, and other goodies. To see photos that we reference in the episode, follow us on Instagram at Resolved Mysteries Podcast, on Facebook and Twitter at Resolve the Pod, and you can contact us at resolvedmysteriespodcast.com, resolvedmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or at our P.O. Box 14005, Portland, Oregon 97293. And please send us some tales for listener short stack episodes. If you want to email us your favorite unsolved mystery, cold case, anything you think we want to talk about. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like us, leave a 5-star review and we might read it on an epi. And tell a friend. And don't forget, every review we receive, we donate $1. And for this month, we are donating to the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. All right.
We love you so.
We do love you.
We do.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And I don't want to be mean, but I think he's wearing a wig or like a hairpiece.
Oh, I would
don't
need to see
remember.
again, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And I wasn't going to comment on it because I didn't want to be mean, but I sort of need answers because on my screen, it looked like his hair was like a purplish brown. And I ended up like fully distracted by it. Like, this is a very sad story. But if it is a hairpiece, it's very strange.
So listeners, sound off.
Yeah, like somebody help me. It's like his hair is like maroon, kind of.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
but it could have
remember this.
it could have been my screen because then Donna Digman comes on, who's Jeffrey's mother, and she has the most beautiful blue eyes. They're super super blue, so I think the color was off on my television.
Okay.